What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. This is Guys That Magic, and I am your host, Dave. Today, I'm going to be taking you through one of our new deck techs. This one, we're going to be examining Mishra, claimed by Gix. This card was just recently spoiled. I'm actually a huge fan of this card. I love Rakdos. It's probably just my favorite color pairing. And I think that a lot of people looked at this card and immediately just jumped over to the fact that it is a meld card with kind of a nutty backside. And they forgot about the fact that Mishra, claimed by Gix, on the front half, is actually also really mean. So what we're going to be aiming to do with this deck tech is really be able to capitalize on his abilities, be able to make sure that that front half is carrying its weight, and then also build our deck in a way that we can reliably be able to transform him in the case we do want the melded version. So with that being said, Mishra, claimed by Gix, is 2 a black and a red for a legendary creature. It's a Phyrexian human artificer. It's a 3/5, and it says whenever you attack, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of attacking creatures. If Mishra, claimed by Gix, and a creature named Phyrexian Dragon Engine are attacking and you both own and control them, exile them, then meld them into Mishra, lost to Phyrexia. It enters the battlefield tapped and attacking. We're also going to make sure that we include that partner pairing, that little meld buddy here, that Phyrexian Dragon Engine. That card is 3 mana for an artifact creature, Phyrexian Dragon. It's a 2/2 with double strike. It says whenever it enters the battlefield from your graveyard, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw 3 cards, and it's got an unearth ability of 3 and 2 red. For those of you who don't know, the way that Unearth works is that you can pay this ability from your graveyard to put this back onto the battlefield. It gains haste, and you would exile it at the beginning of the next end step. Totally fine, though, because in the case you do end up attacking with this thing, if Mishra is in play and also attacking, they'll actually exile themselves out for the meld ability, so you don't have to worry about that exile at the end of turn type thing. The really cool thing about Mishra, and the reason why I really wanted to build this deck, is because you don't actually have to attack with Mishra in order to be able to make sure that he's punishing your opponents, and he's draining all of your opponents. So, we want to make sure with this deck we're attacking with tons of creatures all the time, really being able to capitalize this, and really just kind of being able to pummel our opponents to death. The other really cool thing is it doesn't matter with this deck is if we just tap out and leave ourselves open for a counterattack, because we're going to be gaining a huge amount of life, helping to pad our life total. That way we just can continue to swing in aggressively over and over and over again. Just in case you were a little bit curious about what happens whenever you do end up melding Mishra and the Dragon Engine together, you get Mishra lost to Phyrexia. This is a legendary artifact creature, Phyrexian Artificer. It's a 9/9, and it says whenever Mishra, lost to Phyrexia, enters the battlefield or attacks, choose 3. It's got a lot of modes, so bear with me. It says, target opponent discards 2 cards. Mishra deals 3 damage to any target. Destroy target artifact or planeswalker. Creatures you control gain menace and trample until end of turn. Creatures you don't control get -1/-1 until end of turn. Or create 2 tapped Power Stone tokens. Now the 9/9 body on this thing is absolutely massive and is really going to become a threat pretty quickly. All of the modes on here can be relevant at different points in the game, and although some of them may be a little bit situational, you're never going to have your opportunity come up with this where it's just a dead card. Your opponents are going to have to be able to deal with this pretty quickly, and at a very bare minimum, it's a 9/9 that's just going to be beating face. Now, with that being said, I did primarily want to build this deck in a way that's going to be capitalizing off of attacking with a lot of little creatures, making sure that Mishra's front half is always going to be on and effective. So, our first group of creatures that we're going to put in here are all going to be token makers. The first one here is Loyal Apprentice. This is 1 and a red for a creature human artificer. It's a 2/1 with haste. It says at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control your commander, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. That token gains haste until end of turn. So for 2 mana, you essentially get 2 hasty bodies, so long as you control your commander. In addition to that, she'll continue to pump out a new Thopter for you every single turn, so long as you have your commander in play. So pretty effective little token maker here. We have Anax, Hardened in the Forge. Although not necessarily a token maker on his own, he is wonderful in the case our opponents start packing some removal. He is 1 and 2 red for a total of 3 mana. It's a legendary enchantment creature demigod. He is a star 3. It says that Anax's power is equal to your devotion to red, which is the total number of red pips you have in the permanents you control. It says whenever it or another non-token creature you control dies, create a 1/1 red satyr creature token with. This creature can't block. If the creature had power 4 or greater, create 2 of those tokens instead. Annex is essentially just kind of going to be a little bit of removal protection for us. Make sure that we have tokens in play if our opponents start blowing up our things. On his own, though, he's a pretty solid creature and can get really big in terms of power. It wouldn't be a token deck if we didn't include Krenko in here. This is Krenko 10 Street Kingpin. It is 2 and a red for a legendary creature goblin, a 1/2, and it says whenever it attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it, then create a number of 1/1 red goblin creature tokens equal to Krenko's power. So on the first attack, it'll put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then make 2 goblin tokens from you, and then from there, he just continues to get out of control. If you thought that Krenko was good, we're also going to throw the second one in here. This is Krenko Mob Boss. This is 2 and 2 red for a total of 4. He's a legendary creature goblin warrior. It's a 3/3 that you can tap to create X 1/1 red goblin creature tokens, where X is the number of goblins you control. Krenko is probably the best token maker in red. Now, if you thought that those 2 goblins were impressive, you could probably already kind of see where I'm going with this. This deck does have a bit of a goblin theme. Goblins, as it turns out, are actually really good at being able to get a lot onto the battlefield quickly. And even though for the most part they're just going to be 1/1s with the plentiful tokens we'll be making, that's totally fine because Mishra just cares about us attacking with a lot of creatures, which goblins are really good at doing, and they're also pretty expendable, which we don't really care if they die. Legion Warboss is another great token maker for us. This is 2 and a red for a creature goblin soldier. It's a 2/2 with Mentor. Mentor, for those of you who forgot, says that whenever this creature attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature with lesser power, which is great for all those 1/1 goblin creature tokens you'll be making. It also says at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token. That token gains haste until end of turn and attacks this combat if able. With your commander in play, you totally don't care if that thing does end up dying anyways, because it'll at least be able to drain your opponents for 1 life. Goblin Instigator is 1 and a red for a creature goblin rogue. It's a 1/1, and it says whenever it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token. Although not necessarily a heavy token producer, since it only does it 1 time, coming in for only 2 mana to make 2 bodies is pretty nice, especially with them both being relevant creature types. Some non-token makers in this deck. We have plenty of cards in here designed to punish our opponents in the case that they want to start to remove some of our things or just kind of interact in any way. The first one here that we're going to have is Blood Artist. This is 1 and a red for a creature vampire. It's a 0/1 and says, whenever Blood Artist or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So, if we do have a board filled with a bunch of goblin creature tokens and then our opponent ends up board wiping, Blood Artist goes to town, drains our opponent for a ton of damage, and hopefully puts us in a really powerful position, maybe somewhere that we can potentially knock them out within the next couple of turns. Similarly, we're also going to include Zulaport Cutthroat. This is 1 and a black for a creature human rogue ally. It's a 1/1 and says whenever it or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So pretty similar effect here to Blood Artist, except for Zulaport Cutthroat is going to hit all of your opponents. Judith the Scourge Diva is excellent in this deck. She is 1 a black and a red. She's a legendary creature human shaman, a 2/2, and she says other creatures you control get +1/+0. It also says that whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Judith the Scourge Diva deals 1 damage to any target. Now sadly we are going to be making a ton of tokens in this deck, so that second ability is probably not going to be doing a ton for us, but that first ability, being able to give our tokens that +1/+0, is huge and can be a really powerful boost. Cardor Doomscourge is 2 a black and a red. It's a legendary creature demon berserker, a 4/3, and it says whenever it enters the battlefield until your next turn, creatures your opponents control attack each combat if able and attack a player other than you if able. Whenever an attacking creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So another nice little drain effect here to make sure that we're pummeling our opponents and constantly hitting their life total. In addition to that, Carter is great because he has the ability to make sure that our opponents' boards are not going to be gummed up with all those nasty blockers. Garna Bloodfist of Keld is 1 a black and 2 red for a total of 4 mana. It's a legendary creature human berserker, a 4/3, and it says whenever another creature you control dies, draw a card if it was attacking. Otherwise, Garna Bloodfist of Keld deals 1 damage to each opponent. This is another nice little effect to make sure that our opponents are not going to be using those wrath effects against us. Garnet does a really good job of punishing those opponents. In addition here, in the case that we are attacking and our opponents decide to kill off some of our creatures, we can draw a ton of cards and start to restock our hand pretty quickly. Similarly, we also have Species Specialist here. It is 2 and 2 black for a creature human warrior. It's a 2/3 and it says whenever it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. You're gonna choose goblins in this deck. It says whenever a creature of the chosen type dies, you may draw a card. That may is actually critically important here because there are going to be points in this game where you may end up having 20 or so goblin creature tokens in play. So you may draw a card. And that's going to be really powerful and really impactful here because you're probably also going to have a lot of goblin tokens dying. Pashalik Mons is 2 and a red for a legendary creature goblin warrior. It's a 2/2 and says that whenever it or another goblin you control dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. You can pay 3 and a red to sacrifice a goblin to create 2 more 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. I really love this card in the deck. Not only does it make tokens for us, and also allow us to be able to sacrifice some goblins to use its first ability, but its first ability is super impactful. In the case that our opponents choose to block, we'll probably just be able to hit them for the same amount of damage since she can ping our opponent's faces, and in the case that they end up blocking multiple of our creatures, we could always end up using her ability as kind of like a board wipe, being able to ping 1 point of damage for each goblin that we lost at any of their relevant creatures. We love dealing damage in this deck, so we want to try and maximize it as much as we can, and these next creatures are going to help us do so. The first one here is Torbrand, Thane of Red Fell. This is 1 and 3 red for a total of 4 mana. It's a legendary creature, Dwarf Noble. A 2/4, and it says if a red source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage +2 instead. Well, wouldn't you know it? Our goblin creature tokens are all red. So Torbrand does a massive amount of work in this deck. Metallic Mimic is 2 mana for an artifact creature shapeshifter. It's a 2/1 that says whenever it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. It also says that it is that creature type in addition to its other types, and each other creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. The way that this works is in the case that you would create one of those 1/1 goblin creature tokens, so long as Metallic Mimic is in play and you named goblins, it'll come in with a +1/+1 counter on it. So that means all your 1/1s are now going to be 2/2s. Ogre Battle Driver is 2 and 2 red for a creature Ogre Warrior. It's a 3/3 and it says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, that creature gets +2/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. A huge pump effect, and the haste enabler on this allows us to start swinging in, and it also makes it very difficult for opponents to plan out what blockers they need to keep behind. Hellrider is 2 and 2 red for a creature devil. It's a 3/3 with haste and says whenever a creature you control attacks, it deals 1 damage to the defending player. This is actually very similar to our commander, so it's going to just be able to help us double down on that pinging effect. Now, sadly, it doesn't drain, and sadly, on top of that, it also doesn't hit all of our opponents, but it's really going to hurt one of our opponents especially hard. We have Goblin Trashmaster in this deck. This is 2 and 2 red for a creature Goblin Warrior. It's a 3/3 and says other goblins you control get +1/+1. You can also sacrifice a goblin to destroy target artifact. So a little bit of removal here, a whole lot of pump, and we're going to absolutely love playing this. Hobgoblin Bandit Lord is 1 and 2 red for a creature goblin rogue. It's a 2/3 and it says other goblins you control get +1/+1. You can pay a red and tap it, and it says it deals damage equal to the number of goblins that enter the battlefield under your control this turn to any target. You can use this ability to take care of your opponent's nasty blockers or just be able to pummel their face with a ton of damage. Goblin King is 1 and 2 red for a creature Goblin Lord. It's a 2/2 and it says all goblins get +1/+1 and have Mountain Walk. For those of you who don't remember what Mountain Walk is, it says that our creatures are going to be unblockable so long as our opponent has a mountain. Lastly, here in this pump package, we have Goblin Chieftain. This is 1 and 2 red for a creature goblin. It's a 2/2 with haste, and it says other goblin creatures you control get +1/+1 and have haste. So a ton of ways for us to be able to make those tokens nice and beefy. Make sure that not only are we swinging in and abusing it with our commander's ability, but we're also attacking in with potentially, I don't know, 2/2, 3/3, maybe even 4/4 goblin creature tokens. We do have several other creatures in this deck that are going to be in here primarily for support purposes. The first one that we're going to include is Anger. This is 3 and a red for a creature incarnation. It's a 2/2 with haste. It says as long as Anger is in your graveyard and you control a mountain, creatures you control have haste. Super important here because it's going to be a little bit more difficult for our opponents to interact with it if it is in the graveyard. And seeing as how this isn't really much of a recursion deck, aside from just kind of the dragon engine that our commander partner pairs with, we're probably not going to be the target of a ton of graveyard removal. Next up here, we have Goro Goro, Disciple of Ryusei. This is 1 and a red for a legendary creature goblin samurai. It's a 2/2. You can pay a red. Creatures you control gain haste until end of turn. You can pay 3 and 2 red to create a 5/5 red dragon creature spirit token with flying. Activate only if you control an attacking modified creature. Well, the sad thing here being is that we're probably not going to be using that dragon ability very often in this deck. However, that first ability of paying a red and giving all of our creatures haste is huge. Next up here, we have Goblin Recruiter. This is 1 and a red for a creature goblin. It's a 1/1, and it says, whenever it enters the battlefield, search your library for any number of goblin cards, reveal them, and then shuffle your library. Put the revealed cards on top of it in any order. Goblin Recruiter is an excellent little tutor effect. He can help us to go find some of those Goblin Lords if we need to be able to pump up our team. He can also help us to go find Kranko, make sure that we're going to be drawing into some relevant threats, and really having our board state explode. Neheb the Eternal is a super powerful card in this deck, and absolutely a slam dunk. If you do manage to land this, your opponents need to kill it on sight. Neheb the Eternal is 3 and 2 red. It's a legendary creature zombie minotaur warrior. It's 4/6 and it has Afflict 3. That says whenever this creature becomes blocked, a defending player loses 3 life. And although that ability is cool, it really is a slam dunk for the next one here. It says at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, you add a red mana to your mana pool for each 1 life your opponent's lost this turn. Now, assuming that you have only attacked with a single creature, maybe just this thing, and your commander is in play, your opponents are going to lose 1 life just for the attack clause that your commander has. That's a total of 3 life. 1 for each of your opponents. That means you're going to add 3 red mana, and that's saying that you only had 1 thing attacking. It is really not very difficult for you to be able to have upwards of maybe 5, 10, or more creatures attacking in this deck. So if you only even have something so much as like just 5, it means your opponents are going to lose 15 life. And that's also assuming that none of them have connected. Neheb the Eternal is going to give you a massive amount of red mana for your second main phase, and so much so that oftentimes I don't even have the ability to spend all of it. Absolute slam dunk of a card. Your opponents need to kill this, or you're going to just dump your hand. Magus of the Wheel is 2 and a red for a creature human wizard. It's a 3/3. You can pay 1 and a red to tap it and sacrifice it. It says each player discards their hand, then draws 7 cards. Now you are restocking your opponent's hand, however, chances are you're going to be using this because you no longer have a hand. For the most part, you're going to be pumping out your creatures relatively quickly. This deck likes to get a head start and is pretty low to the ground. So Magus of the Wheel hopefully will be drawing you a grip of a fresh 7, while maybe only drawing your opponents a couple of cards. Legion Loyalist is a pet card of mine. I just love throwing this thing in decks, and it goes wonderful in here. It is a single red mana for a creature goblin soldier. It's a 1/1 with haste and battalion. It says whenever Legion Loyalist and at least 2 other creatures attack, creatures you control gain first strike and trample until end of turn and can't be blocked by creature tokens this turn. The first strike and trample will make sure that you're going to be able to get some extra damage through, as well as hopefully keeping blockers away from them for that first strike clause. And secondly, if you are playing up against another deck that uses a lot of tokens, Legion Loyalist is a way for you to be able to break parity and just cruise right past their board, be able to hit face with them. Lastly here, because we are a token deck and because we have the ability to make a ton of goblins, we're going to go ahead and throw in Perforus, God of the Forge. This is 3 in red for a legendary enchantment creature god. It's a 6/5 with indestructible and says that as long as your devotion to red is less than 5, Perforus isn't a creature. That's okay though, because he also says that whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Perforus deals 2 damage to each opponent. Lastly, you can pay 2 in a red, and creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. He is a mana sink that deals a massive amount of damage, and because he is a legendary enchantment and is indestructible, he's oftentimes rather difficult to get rid of. Moving forward, we have a couple of instants and sorceries that are going to help to support our deck. This first group is going to be focused primarily on making sure that we are drawing cards. The first one that I'm going to talk about here is Big Score. This is 3 and a red for an instant. It says, as an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card. It also says, draw 2 cards, then create 2 treasure tokens. So hopefully we can pitch something that's not very relevant, or maybe we can pitch something like, I don't know, Anger, a card we talked about earlier on. Faithless Looting is going to be included in here. It would be absolutely just blasphemous for me to be able to make a red deck and not include this card. It's a single red mana for a sorcery. It says draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards, and it's got a flashback ability on it where you can cast it a second time from the grave for 2 and a red. Village Rites is a single black mana for an instant. It says, as an additional cost, to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature, draw 2 cards. Thrill of Possibility is 1 and a red for an instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card, draw 2 cards. And Wheel of Misfortune is kind of a weird one, so bear with me on this. It is 2 and a red for a sorcery. It says each player secretly chooses a number 0 or greater. Then all players reveal those numbers simultaneously and determine the highest and lowest numbers revealed this way. Wheel of Misfortune deals damage equal to the highest number to each player who chose that number. Each player who didn't choose the lowest number discards their hand, then draws 7 cards. So it is a way for you to be able to potentially restock your hand or even deal some damage to your opponents, hopefully help you close out the game a little bit faster. A couple of the other instants and sorceries that we have in this deck are going to focus on token production. A couple of our creatures do it, but we do want an extra support. The first one here is Goblin Offensive. It is X 1 and 2 red for a minimum of 3 mana. It's a sorcery that says you create X number of 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. Temple of Vengeance is X and a red for a sorcery with Tempting Offer. It says put X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste onto the battlefield. Each opponent may put X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste onto the battlefield. For each player who does, put X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste onto the battlefield. So say, for example, you pay for, I don't know, enough to get 3 tokens in play. Each of your opponents will also have the opportunity to drop 3 tokens. If any of them take you up on it, though, you'll be able to make an additional 3 tokens per player who took the offer. So if you have all 3 of your opponents accept the offer, you'll make 12 instead of 3 1/1 red tokens. So pretty nice, especially considering our commander doesn't always care if our creatures connect. He'll deal damage just by having them attack. Krenko's Command is 1 and a red for a sorcery. Create 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. Hordling Outburst is 1 and 2 red for a sorcery. Create 3 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. And you see a pair of goblins is 2 and a red for an instant. It says choose 1. The first mode on it says charge them. Creatures you control get +2/+0 until end of turn. And the second mode says befriend them. Create 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. This acts as both a token production card whenever you need it, as well as an anthem effect to be able to pump your team if you need to get in for that extra damage. Also, super nice, this is an instant. So if your opponents decide not to block some of your creatures, you can always use this to potentially just kill one of your opponents with a bunch of surprise damage. Next up, we're going to talk about our removal package. In here, we're packing Bedevil, 2 black and a red for a total of 3. It's an instant that says destroy target artifact, creature, or planeswalker. Dreadbore is a black and a red for a sorcery that says destroy target creature or planeswalker. Infernal Grasp is 1 and a black for an instant, destroy target creature, you lose 2 life. Terminate is a black and a red for an instant, destroy target creature, it can't be regenerated. And our 2 board wipes are going to be Blasphemous Act at a total of 8 and a red, a massive 9 mana. It's a sorcery that says it costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield. It deals 13 damage to each creature though. Toxic Deluge is 2 and a black for a sorcery. It says, as an additional cost to cast this spell, pay X life. All creatures get -X/-X until end of turn. Our commander Mishra is actually going to do a really good job of gaining us a ton of life, so I wouldn't really be worried about paying a pretty hefty toll for this card. The next 3 instants and sorceries included in this deck are going to be mainly focused on just general support. The first one here is Buried Alive. This is 2 and a black for a sorcery. It says search your library for up to 3 creature cards, put them into your graveyard, then shuffle your library. What you're going to want to do with this card is go find Anger, go find the Dragon Engine, and go find whatever third creature you probably just don't think is going to be very relevant, and pitch them to the graveyard. Diabolic Intent is 1 and a black for a sorcery. It says, as an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature, search your library for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So a wonderful tutor effect. Dark Ritual is a single black mana for an instant. It says, add 3 black mana to your mana pool. This helps us get our commander out, potentially on turn 2. The next 2 sorceries that we're going to talk about are all about making sure we are pummeling our opponents for damage. The first one here is Relentless Assault. This is 2 and 2 red for a total of 4. It's a sorcery that says untap all creatures that attacked this turn. After this main phase, there's an additional combat phase, followed by an additional main phase. What's better than attacking once than attacking twice? World at War is 3 and 2 red for a sorcery. It says, after the first post-combat main phase this turn, there's an additional combat phase, followed by an additional main phase. At the beginning of that combat phase, untap all creatures that attacked this turn, and it's got Rebound. Rebound says, if you cast this spell from your hand, exile it as it resolves. At the beginning of your next upkeep, you may cast this card from exile without paying its mana cost. So we could potentially use this ability twice to take 2 additional combat steps on 2 different turns. Moving over into the artifacts, this first group that we're going to talk about, these are all just going to be the mana rocks that are going to help this deck really hum and just generally support it. I'm not going to talk about these cards, at least not in detail, or tell you what they do. We're just going to flash them up here on the screen because, well, you probably know what all of them do by now. Arcane Signet, Soul Ring, Felwar Stone, Talisman of Indulgence, Mind Stone, and Rakdos Signet are all going to be included in this deck. Generally, what you need to know is I love 2 mana artifact rocks, and that's exactly what all of these are, except for Soul Ring, of course. That's even better at just 1 mana. We have 4 other equipment in this deck that are going to help to make sure that our deck is really going to be playing as optimally as possible. The first one here is Whisper Silk Cloak. For 3 mana, you get an artifact equipment. It says the equipped creature can't be blocked and has Shroud, an equip cost of 2. If you haven't noticed, we really care about keeping our commander alive, so being able to give it Shroud is super impactful, and being able to make sure that it can't be blocked means we always have the ability to start attacking with it and triggering his ability. Swiftfoot Boots is 2 mana for an artifact equipment. It says the equipped creature has Hexproof and Haste for an equip cost of 1. And Lightning Greaves is 2 mana for an artifact equipment. It says the equipped creature has Haste and Shroud and has an equip cost of 0. All 3 of these equipment are going to make sure that our commander stays around for a very long time. Lastly, of course, we are a low-to-the-ground token deck, and the best way to take advantage of that is by throwing Skull Clamp into the deck. For a single mana, you get an artifact equipment. It says the equipped creature gets +1/-1. Whenever the equipped creature dies, draw 2 cards and an equip cost of 1. That's right, kill your poor little goblins to draw 2 cards. And do it over and over and over again. Skull Clamp is a super powerful draw engine. We are only going to be running 4 enchantments in this deck. All 4 of these, however, are basically going to be focused around the same kind of thing, and that's making sure that our opponents just die quickly. The first one here is Aggravated Assault. This is 2 and a red for a total of 3. It's an enchantment that says you can pay 3 and 2 red to untap all creatures you control. After this main phase, there is an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase. Activate this ability only any time you could cast a sorcery. Now, I know that I mentioned earlier on that if you do happen to have Neheb in play, you're going to be making a ton of red mana and you probably don't know what to dump it into. Well, as it turns out, this card is wonderful for you to be able to dump into because then you'll just keep swinging, making more and more red mana, and then just dumping it into this. You're probably just going to win the game on the back of that. I wouldn't call it an infinite combo by any means because you still need creatures in play to make sure that this thing is working, and at some point, you could end up running out, but chances are after your 9th combat step, all of your opponents are probably going to be dead. Dictate of the Twin Gods is in this deck. It is 3 and 2 red for an enchantment with Flash. It says if a source would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. Now, super important to notice here is that Dictate of the Twin Gods will hurt you too. So if your opponent is swinging in with a 4/4, it's going to hit like an 8/8. However, that's totally fine. This thing has Flash. We're going to drop this in play to make sure it just outright kills one of our opponents. We're going to make sure that we throw this thing in play and then start draining our opponents for a huge amount of life with Mishra. Everything's great. Just be careful and don't die. Fiery Emancipation is 3 and 3 red for a total of 6 mana. It's an enchantment, and it says if a source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple that damage to that permanent or player instead. So just like Dictate of the Twin Gods, it's going to help us be able to make sure that we're dealing tons of damage, but it doesn't have any of the downside because their opponent's creatures aren't going to hit us any harder than what they normally would. Lastly here, we have a ton of creatures that all share the same creature type, so Shared Animosity is a slam dunk in the list. This is 2 and a red for an enchantment. It says whenever a creature you control attacks, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn for each other attacking creature that shares a creature type with it. If we attack with 5 goblins, each of those goblins will look around, see 4 other attacking goblins in play, and the entire swath of them will get +4/+0. That's going to turn your little 1/1 goblins in that case into 5/1 goblins. They're going to hit like a brick. To round out this deck, we're going to talk about the mana base. We have Blightstep Pathway as the pathway land included in this deck. You can have it enter the battlefield on the front side, tap for a black, or the back side, tap for a red. Command Tower can tap for either red or black. Dragon Skull Summit can tap for either red or black and enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a mountain or a swamp. Haunted Ridge enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands. It can tap for either a black or a red. Luxury Suite says it enters the battlefield tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents, which you probably won't. You can tap for a black or a red. Temple of Malice enters the battlefield tapped. Whenever it does, it'll scry you 1. It can tap for either a black or a red. Super important to note, you probably want to drop Temple of Malice on the sooner rather than later side, just because you want to make sure you get that scry and not stutter yourself for the turn. Tainted Peak, you can tap for a colorless mana, or if you control a swamp, you can tap for either a black or a red. Sulphurous Springs, you can tap it for 1 colorless mana, or you can tap it, have it deal 1 damage to you, and add either a black or a red. Don't worry, that life loss in this deck really not going to amount to much. We do have 2 additional utility lands in here. This is going to be Rogue's Passage. It can tap for a colorless mana, or you can pay 4 mana and tap it. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. As it turns out, Rogue's Passage is really, really good with particular 9/9 that we might be attacking within this deck. Also included here is War Room. It's a land that can tap for a colorless mana, or you can pay 3, tap it, and pay life equal to the number of colors in your commander's color identity, so 2, and draw a card. To round this out, we are going to be throwing in 11 swamps and 14 mountains. All in all, this deck currently comes up to about $338. There is a tutor in this deck in the form of Diabolic Intent, so if you are looking to make this a little bit on the cheaper side, you can always cut that. There's also a couple other effects in here and a few lands that are a little bit more on the pricier side. Nothing necessarily too crazy, but if you do want to build this for a little bit more of a budget, there are some options that you can end up cutting without really removing the overall integrity or strength of the deck. With that being said, though, this deck is actually super, super aggressive. Mishra Claimed by Gix, just the front half of the Mishra card, is actually really powerful. And I often found that just in my playtesting with this deck, half the time I didn't want to meld Mishra. Melding Mishra to Mishra Lost to Phyrexia, although yeah, the 9/9 is super powerful and is going to put in some work, the just normal Mishra card actually almost always just does enough to kill our opponents, and the life gain that it's going to be causing for us is actually pretty large. Generally speaking, I mean, I think this deck is incredibly quick. It's very aggressive, and after you do end up playing with this at your local game store or just like in your own local meta, your opponents are probably going to pick up relatively quickly that they need to kill Mishra before you're able to start attacking in with it. Otherwise, their life totals are just going to rapidly hit 0. All in all, I think this deck is actually a ton of fun. As always, we love all of the support. Make sure that you comment down below to this video. What kind of cards would you have included in this list that maybe I didn't? What other kind of direction maybe would you have taken Mishra in? Or what other thoughts and ideas do you have to make this deck a little bit more unique and a little bit more your own? Make sure that you like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. And in addition to that, follow us on our other social media platforms like Instagram and Twitter at GuysThatMagic. Until next time, peace.